Welcome to the webinar today. We're excited to have you. This is Derek Feldman, and we'll be spending the next 45 minutes to the hour talking about what you do after you receive a donation. We'll offer some great creative ideas for you to consider to go above and beyond what you typically do right now to try and bring donors just a little bit closer to your organization, especially after they've given you a nice, wonderful financial contribution. And so, as usual, if you participated in any of our sessions before, you know that this session is going to be recorded, and we'll have the PowerPoint presentation with all the examples of all the different organizations available for you that you can view at a later date. You'll be able to access that on the Achieve Access site, and being a part of the Festival of Children Foundation membership, Festival of Children member organizations have that access for free for a year, of course. So we'll make sure if you don't know your login or anything that we'll get that to you too as well. And I do also want to say that I'm excited that towards the end of this week, for those of you who are obviously on this call with Festival of Children Foundation, that will actually be in Orange County area. So any of you local organizations who are based where the Festival of Children Foundation is will be with you for on a Friday session talking about design and fundraising. So it's pretty exciting, and I'll look forward to hopefully seeing you there. And maybe you can bring some of your actual solicitations, and we'll be able to talk about them with a larger group. So again, thanks for being with us for the next 45 minutes to the hour. Any questions, like usual, put them into the GoToWebinar chat panel, and we'll make sure and get to those towards the end of the presentation. And so this is kind of, I would say, an idea generation session, because what we want to do today is provide you with a lot of different ideas and concepts to consider for some of your stewardship and donor engagement programs. A lot of you probably have, doing the typical things, and that is we make sure that we get our thank you letter out there. Of course, the good standard is within 24 hours, if you can hopefully meet that. And then also providing ongoing communication to them. And what we have found with a lot of the organizations that we work with is that stewardship isn't really something that's as important as cultivation efforts or anything else. And because of that, we tend to see some of the stewardship programs not really own up to the cultivation experience that a donor has had. Let me explain a little bit further. When you're attracting or trying to get a donor, you spend a considerable amount of resources, time, and energy, whether it be prospecting and cultivating, meeting with them, sending them materials, doing a lot of different things. And when a person becomes a donor with you, it's after they become a donor that they start to realize that maybe it's not the same type of experience that you've had, because you're not going to the extra mile potentially to try and involve them and engage them. And so because of that, it sort of becomes what we would call a disenfranchised experience, or an experience that's just very awkward for the donor after they become a donor with you. And so what we want to do is equalize the engagement that they have prior to getting a gift with the experience that they have after getting a gift, or after giving that gift too as well. So that's what today's conversation is about. So let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, when we look at the donation piece, we have to understand that stewardship and donor engagement is not just great practice, but it's actually necessary for donors to renew. If you ever sit down with a donor and ask them a couple questions about their experiences being a donor, they'll typically tell you about all of the things that went wrong with a previous organization that they supported. Because it's, as my father always said, everybody remembers not when you were hired, but how you leave. And it's the same thing. Nobody remembers potentially that first gift they made, but probably the way in which they left, or the things that you didn't do to really own up, or to really live up to what they were expecting. The other thing is that stewardship and donor engagement matters most to the donor and not to you. And that's something that we have to remember. It's not a thing for you, it's a thing for them. It's a thing to help them understand how you've used their money. It's a thing to help them become closer to the organization. It's about the donor in the process, not just practice that you need to do. I mean, the reason that you would send a letter 24 hours saying that we've gotten your donation is to make sure that the donor understands you've gotten it and that you've received it and you've acknowledged it, and hopefully that you're thanking them for that contribution. It's about them. So we talk a lot about donor-centric fundraising. You'll hear that concept in a lot of different areas, books and materials. And it's that same concept of focusing on that individual and what it means to them to help you achieve your mission when you're cultivating them. And it also means the same thing to ensure that after they've given that gift, what it means to them and what's the experience that they want to have to the next time that you want to seek their support or ask them to involve themselves again. There are typically 5 donor categories, and when we look at stewardship, we break it down into 5 categories and areas. And it's easy for you to get to these 5 areas if you start to think about it differently. So first, that we do have these transactional donors that after they give a donation to you, they want limited interaction with you. And we as organizations find that hard sometimes to accept because for some of us, we think, well, if you give us a gift, you know, that's the ticket for you to be involved at other levels and to do so many other things with us. But for some people, they just want to really be transactional with you, and that's okay. And that happens when people have things that are timely or family issues, all different kinds of pieces. Then we've got these transactional donors who love to know things. They want to, after they give a gift, know how you're doing, what's the next thing that you're working on, the kinds of pieces that help us get from, I am now just giving to you, but now I want to give to you and learn more and expand my thinking. Again, not every donor wants to be there, but there is that few there too. We tend to see that volunteer donors love to share stories, love to hear stories after they give gifts. They're the ones that want to continue to be involved with the organization through the work that you're doing with the people that you're serving, because they're so impacted by the people that they're experiencing when they're volunteering. They find joy and excitement and they're engaged when they continue to hear about those stories ongoing. Then we've got major donors. And just like our transactional donors, there are major donors that just want to have limited communication with us too. And I'll give you some examples of some donors that I've had. I'll give you some stories pieces here in a second. But those are the donors where they want to be taken off your direct mail appeals. They don't want to receive email communication from you on a regular basis. And then we've got those major donors that are completely inquisitive all the time, that want the behind the scenes stuff, the interests and things that are going on with your organization. What are you dealing with right now? How can I help as well? And trying to get into certain areas in which that they could really help you, but they want to understand more about your models and the things that you're doing. So I want to give you some examples. When I was leading fundraising efforts for a national organization, I had people all of the time in these categories. And one of the key things that I would do after visiting with a donor that I got a gift is I would literally go back to my development staff and say, John Doe is going to be a transactional donor with us who really wants limited amount of anything from us, except for one call a year. And that call should be about halfway through the year just to catch up. And then the next time would be a solicitation again. And he's completely fine with that. And so should we. And therefore, let's manage our communication preferences and do the things that we need to in order to make it successful. Then, I would always have that transactional donor. And I would find that when I would sit down and ask questions about what's going on in their life, how are they doing, it almost came out as if that I like you, but I want limited involvement with you right now because of all of those things. I did always have a transactional donor that would give me the $50 to $100 and want to know everything. And you probably have this too. Some of them may be your board members. But I had a $100, a $200 donor where I would sit down or we would meet or I would go out and about and be somewhere at the coffee shop or whatever it is. And they would be there and talk to me and say, well, what's happening? How are things going? And want to be just immensely involved in some of the knowledge pieces that are occurring. They love to hear about the board. They love to hear about the staff, the latest big projects that we're working on, and which is always really good, except unfortunately, based upon the amount of donors I had in my portfolio, it was really tough for me to do that kind of knowledge all the time. Then we had our volunteer donors that I mentioned that love to have those stories. And for me, it was always one of those to keep those stories in the back of my mind. Or I would sit down with our volunteer coordinator or staff person and say, what are some latest things that are really fun that if I interact with any of these kinds of donors that I could talk to them about. The major donors limited communication. I actually had more of these than typical. And I would say only because some of the major donors I had were ones that were ones that were on the end of the spectrum of age. And they said, we're completely at my age. I would hear this all the time from this donor group. Is that at my age, I know so much what I care about. I don't need to be convinced anymore. I just want to hear once in a while how things are going, but I'm okay. Sort of that hands-off approach, but I'll continue to give you resources. And then, of course, the ones to be in the know, behind the scenes folks, were ones that I would say were more entrepreneurial type of donors with us that were intrigued about some of the projects we were working on and ways to make them successful. And they may have provided advice and counsel themselves once we were developing the projects and launching them. So in each one of those, I had sort of this, I know the kind of donor you are. And I started to think differently about the types of donors rather than saying, okay, thanks for the gift, put them into the pool of communication, and then we're all good. Well, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the different elements of communication, because that tends to be one of the first pieces that we provide to our donors. And we provide our donors with a lot of different types of communication. And one of the things that we always like to help our donors, and the things that I would ask my donor is, do you want these urgent updates and breaking news? What kind of communication do you want on how we're doing our job? And we would call that impact statements. Maybe leadership development ideas, or even how the organization is doing. And sometimes we would do that communication, whether it be through email, sometimes through print. We do it through great images or storytelling. We try to weave in as much transparency as we can to try and help them get to a point of understanding how their gift is used. And sometimes we even went to the expense of using video. And video can be a little expensive, and sometimes you use interns and others, but it does get a little challenging. But what I would say is as you sit down with some of your donors, I'm going to talk from the sense of both donors that like major donors, and then I'm going to talk about those transactional donors. Because in major donors, you're probably sitting down and actually having one-on-one, face-to-face conversations. And with some of your donors who are more transactional, a lot of this kind of communication or preference for communication would actually come through follow-up emails, different types of follow-up mechanisms that you would have that are more broad-based, that are sent to anybody. So when it comes to some of the major donors, what I would do is I would often have like a checklist of things that I would have internally with me. And I never actually showed that checklist with them unless they asked me. But I would say that this is all the different types of communication pieces that we do. I want to make sure, and especially if they were a first-time donor, I would always ask them and say, as a first-time donor, I want to make sure that we're working together and giving you the things that you want in the amount of information that you want, and that we're communicating effectively with you. And I said, we send communication out, and this is the types of communications that will come out from us from time to time. Can I just run through them really quick? We won't have to do this again, but I just want to make sure that you get what you want. And I'll say, we have a monthly newsletter. It has a couple things like this in it. It might be tips on the programs, some resources. Do you want that? Do you want updates from me on a quarterly basis, or from my executive director? Do you want me to give you some breaking news or urgent things, or is it okay if we save that unless it's completely urgent related to a gift that you would have? And so I would actually walk through for the first time and make sure that they understood what we send out and what the purpose of that communication is, and ensure that they want to be a part of it. In subsequent years, after I had sat down with them again, I wouldn't do that every time. But what I would do is actually create, or I would ask them and say, so over the last year, have you been getting the right preference and the right frequency of communication from us? Is there anything more that you want, or anything less, or is everything okay? I would just do a check-in just to make sure that they're fine with it. So on the major donor face-to-face, first time that you get a gift that's whatever major donor category you have, begin to ask them and break it down and say, I just want to put this into our system to make sure that you don't get what you don't want. When it comes to some of the transactional donors, that's a little different. Sometimes what we decided to do, and I have an example on here for you, is who's your environmental council? And this is an environmental advocacy organization. And so what we did in this sense is look at the transactional donor. And this is also actually a good piece for existing donors too, or from major donors, but it was primarily targeted towards those donors that we don't meet with a lot, and or those they're more at the transactional level, the lower annual fund level. And the goal there is to help them understand, this is our impact and how we're making a difference, and how we're making a difference with their donations in dollars. And roughly about 6 months in, roughly about a month in after they give a gift, an email is sent to them that says, we want to actually send you to our impact area. And part of that impact area shows you some of our goals for the year. It also shows you some of the things that we're working on. It had a video from the executive director talking about their goals and their dashboard and why they're doing this. And that after that month in, they started to see how we were using their funds and dollars. It was a great piece. It was broadly distributed, but there was personalization. So it would have like Dear Derek or Dear something else. In addition to that, as you can see on the bottom right hand there, it says Dear Jesse. But in addition to that, what this did too is it started to create at least some additional communication pieces with our transaction donors. After some of the transaction donors are actually give, depending on how you have your email systems, you can send to them a profile, or we want to manage your profile in the communications. Now you can do that also on the donation forms, where you say that these are the different types of communications we have. Let us know which ones you prefer or which ones you don't prefer. So they're opting into some of those. But at the very least, we would make sure that they would receive something similar to this that shows a little bit of that transparency overall. The other thing that I would mention too is that as you're going through some of your more on the lower levels of those donors, not only did we create a transparency piece, but from time to time we did send at least a brief note asking them and giving them a short, brief update if they asked for updates via email. That update could have been a video. It could have been it could have been a short, just Outlook email that went out to a series of donors too as well. So there was that option too. Another organization that does it really well is do something where they actually have their performance dashboard, and that this is sent out. This is a page that's actually visited by their donors. They receive this about 3 or 4 months within their gift and donation. There's an email that goes out and it talks about what their impact is, what they're doing for this for every quarter. They actually also have what they call quarterly shareholder meetings. Even though they're a nonprofit, their shareholders are the donors who don't own the organization, but they help make the impact happen. And in those monthly shareholder meetings, they go through things like this, like videos, discussions around their dashboard and where they're going. So what we would recommend at the very least that you can see here is at least some sort of communication once a year that introduces this impact section, or at least has them understand where and how their financial dollars are being used. All right, so let's go ahead and talk through participation, which is the second element of what you could do differently with your donations. When we think about participation, we usually think about the 4 categories that you see there. So special events, what we would call appreciation events. Special events would be a different fundraising, gala, benefits, that stuff. Appreciation activities would be focused on just thanking them. There's no cost. There's just an opportunity to meet with them and thank them for their gifts. Advisory are what we would call vision meetings, which that you would actually sit down with your donors and talk through different ways or what's happening with the cause area. So like if you're a cancer organization, you could have an advisory or a vision meeting or a donor educational session about what you're doing to address certain things in cancer now that new research has come out. Advisory or vision meetings are great ways to talk through where your strategic goals are going, and what we call more of an assistive planning mode as well. And then, of course, participation in more promotional activities. And in these promotional activities, we do things like promotion for stewardship. promotion for contests and things like that, in which you want a donor to help you accomplish something in which that their organization receives in return. In all of this kind of participation, we have to understand that not every donor loves events. We assume they do. And I know that we've even worked with some clients where as soon as you get that special event on, you just get disappointed that maybe some of your other donors who normally give to you just wouldn't attend. Or if they decide to go, or if they don't decide to go, they just give you a small donation instead of buying the bigger ticket. So we've seen that a lot. And again, the challenge there is that not everybody likes events. Events are mainly about an experience that night in which, the mission is coupled with something that's going on. The challenge with the event model for a lot of people is that it especially for donors that are some of your major donors, is that it's not conducive to some of that private knowledge, understanding, all of that. It's more conducive to a social atmosphere piece in which that some donors just don't want to have that philanthropic experience where it's more social. What we do see, though, is that there are certain donors that love the appreciation side of it. And so where you may not get those donors that go to your special events, they will go to your appreciation activities and events. And we do see a lot of that, too, which is a great option for some organizations. And I would say that in all of the types of participation activities, that you need to sit down with your donor after they give a gift for the first time and say, I want to tell you about some events and activities that we have for our donors specifically, that I just want to make sure that it's on your radar screen and so that you can get involved too later on. And those special events might include our annual gala. We'd love to have you attend as well. There's a small cost or whatever that cost is. We have an appreciation event, and here's the date when that is. I don't know if you're interested, but from time to time, maybe once a quarter or twice a year, we ask our donors to come visit with our board to talk about some ideas and to hear directly from the board about what's going on. And then the last one might be, there's nothing I would really talk about with promotion, but just say, if you're okay, you might hear different types of things that we're doing with other companies or anything else in which that you might receive some benefits from them. If you don't want to hear anything about that, then that's fine. And so really, again, during that first one, that's where you can talk about all the different types of events and different promotions that are going on. You can see here's a good example from NYU in which that they're using their Giving Society awards dinner program. Michael Bloomberg is the person was there, recognizing contributions at certain levels, participation in certain donor pieces. And the donor appreciation and giving level society obviously is another opportunity for you to get people to give at a certain level in order to attend some of these events. I would say, though, that if another opportunity you might want to consider is that if you do host a lot of events for donors and or just for the public, is that if maybe a donor gives at a certain level, you might be able to offer a little bit of a discount or something else. Those are just additional benefits that we have seen be used. However, I will say that donors that come through a different, that come through the non-event model of just fundraising, those donors don't necessarily look at the event as a philanthropic piece, and they probably wouldn't attend anyway and give through that way. And so for you, a benefit like that may not be a huge opportunity. When we work with a film festival, and that film festival is a huge event in which that participation in the event is limited, it does become a great donor benefit for some donors at certain levels. So they've created, I would say, the marketplace for activity and participation at the event. Therefore, that is a great benefit for some donors to actually receive. So I want to go back and make sure that you understand a couple things. One is that in participation, we have your own organization's events, and we also have opportunities exclusively for donors. That would be appreciation activities, advisory meetings in which that you could do with the board in a more subtle place as well. And then the last thing with participation events is make sure that you're inviting a spouse to most of these. That's a great opportunity. And especially when you're looking at advisory or vision meetings, those are great ways to get spouses together to hear about an organization, visit with board, do a lovely evening with the organization too. Don't forget those as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the experiential part of things. Now, we usually look at experiential as opportunities for your donors to experience the cause firsthand. Now, the easiest one of that, of course, is volunteerism. And so and we had mentioned that there's, some of your volunteers or some of your donors will be your volunteers. That's a great way, but it's not necessarily for everybody. We have seen some other great opportunities be things like educational tours in which that, I'll give you a great example. We work with a different environmental, one of the Keep America Beautiful affiliates. And what they do is that they actually have a tour every year for their donors to see some of the areas in the city that they've worked on, and then also some of the blighted areas that they're going to focus their energy on. And they wrap a lot of great stories around it and how they're going to use resources. It's a great educational tool and tour as well. I have another example here in just a second that I'll be able to share even more with you. The third one is shadowing, in which that's a different experience in which that they actually shadow behind the executive director or leader or somebody in which that they experience your work for a day. And we've even done that for transactional donors, in which that they could not only attend a day or have a day at the facility, but we've even recorded what that day or experience was for some donors. And so it really was almost like a school tour day, if you can imagine that. And then the last one is the beneficiary contact. These are opportunities in which that you host events or activities in which that your beneficiaries can talk about what is meant for the organization to work with and how they have impacted how they've impacted them personally. In the experiential part of this, what we have to make sure that we do is wrap the story of the organization within any experience that the donor might have. We've even seen some great online pieces where webinars have been done, educational pieces have been done, where pre and post opportunities to tell stories of what things were like and where things are going and how you can make a difference are really important. I will say that if you haven't been in the business of creating experiences for donors, that make sure that you have your logistics in mind, and make sure that you have an agenda and you know exactly what you want to do. For some of your donors, they're expecting something to be a great experience with you. And so minor things like logistics, even on tours or anything else, can be a little challenging. I want to share with you a piece here that this was, and the reason that it looks a little weird on your screen is that this was actually a trifold piece. And I did take out some pieces here just to make sure that we had the pieces that we were allowed to use. But what we did is that after a donor received a thank you letter, or when the donor received a thank you letter, this was an insert. It was a trifold piece, and it talked about the different ways that they could participate as a donor. They could connect, and obviously here's the different newsletters and options. They could participate in their event that was upcoming too as well. Then they could also, as you could see here, they could also lead in different areas too, in the development committees, the teen leaders in action, and the volunteers too as well. And then, as you can see in the right-hand side, they also discuss different ways in which that donor could actually participate from that perspective. And so from each area, and again, this was inserted into the thank you letter that was sent out to the donor upon receipt of a financial gift. The great thing about that financial letter that you see there, or that letter that was used, is that we've always said that when you send some material out, it's like real estate. So we want to use that real estate as much as possible. So in this piece, it was meant for their donors and help them connect, participate, lead, or volunteer. And they even had leadership opportunities, that advisory sense, where they were looking for volunteers to help them in a little bit different, I would say, a little bit different roles than they had in the past. So as you see here, different options to include. Another option you can consider is that if you write a thank you letter, which you should be, which has the typical thank you language on the front, you could do this same thing on the back. You're probably not even using the back of a form letter anyway, so you could simply copy this language or do something very similar to this language to let them know of the different participation opportunities that might exist. The other thing that you might want to consider too is that if you are sending thank you letters, that might be a good time to include a buck slip or a piece that might be included in there that talks about more about the organization or ways that they can learn more about the issues that you're dealing with. One of the other things that sometimes we've counseled organizations with who've had a lot of donors who represent families is that we've created an insert piece that goes into the thank you letter that had all the different events or activities in which that they can participate with their family or how they could get involved. Again, great ideas for really helping that donor understand how to make others around them get involved in the cause. And then the last piece that I would say relative to when you're sending that thank you letter and you're talking about all the different ways to get involved is that I would recommend highly on there to even include a contact form or even we've even created at times a contact slip that was put in there that talks about if you have any questions or need any questions related to the receipt of your donation, this is who you call. If you have any questions related to volunteering, this is who you can call. If you have any questions to sign up or purchase tickets for the event, this is who you can call. And so it was really a contact us form too as well that provided some great contact information in addition to some of their events and activities. And so one side was contact information. The other side was a planning piece, a calendar piece that talked about different events and activities throughout the year. So a couple different options for you to really consider as you go through and think through some options from that communicate and participate levels. So, okay, let's talk lastly about some seminars and education program. So before it was educational, but really light on the education, much more focused on participating as a volunteer or serving in some capacity. In this way, on the education side, where a lot of that is centered around is ensuring that they're actually learning about the cause. A great example is that if some donors with like Livestrong or Cancer Society pieces will actually get educational pieces where they can learn how to do hands-on CPR or learn the different effects of cancer. So what you're doing is basically providing exclusive opportunities for some of your donors. We've seen it that be seminars or educational trips, interviews too as well, and online webinars. The greatest, I think one of the best pieces I've ever seen happen is the American Red Cross does it really well, where they call it their volunteer or disaster college, in which it's being used right now, given the hurricane that's in the Northeast, in which that people participate in that college, and at the end outcome of it, they can volunteer, both as a volunteer in different capacities, whether it be administrative and or primarily for their disaster relief areas. So education programs are really great. This is where you focus less on organizational content and more about the cause or the issue. So you're going to help the donor understand more about cancer. You're going to help the donor understand more about animal welfare or the social service side of things. You focus less on you and more definitely on that education experience. When I was leading national fundraising efforts, one of the things that I would do, because we were in the education space, is that as part of our appreciation events, we held another session right after that for some of our donors who were interested in hearing our curriculum director talk about some of the latest challenges with education reform or curriculum. And it was a really great experience for them because they got to ask firsthand. And it was wonderful for us to highlight that individual as the content expert in front of them. And so we definitely had a great turnout for that. And it was a lot of idea sharing and a lot of people coming together and hearing about different examples. I would say that what you're probably seeing right here is one of the most comprehensive education pieces that you'll find, and that's World Wildlife Fund, which does where you can see some donors in there touching whales and seeing firsthand what's actually happening. They have a full travel program that really allows donors to experience certain things. Again, that's a little bit on the intensive side. You don't have to go that route, but you can also go another route where you're just doing what I was mentioning earlier is, using some of your program staff who are more content experts and or even your board members. If you don't have a big staff who's in that area, use board members who are typically experts too. We work with a health organization, a child health organization, and they had a local hospital board or local hospital CEO on there who they invited to speak to some of their donors about what are some of the latest health challenges, healthcare reform, some of the things that they're doing to address it. And it was, and then we, of course, coached him on making sure that he, put in there, weaved into the conversation, the organization and how they're addressing things. But they used a board member to do some educational content instead of just their own in-house too as well. So these are all great opportunities. I would say, though, that the reason education is last is because I would recommend developing that communication, that participation piece, and the experiential pieces first, because usually a lot of organizations, regardless of size, have those elements really at their disposal. And if I had to look at as importance first, we look at how we communicate as the most important piece with our donors and understanding what they want, looking at that second area of participation and how they can attend events and activities. And then the last one is how they can serve too as well. So it's just the level of importance that we're typically seeing. The last thing that I would say about education events and activities is that sometimes you don't have to create it all the time yourself. I know that you're very busy and there's a lot of different things that are happening, and for you to always create these opportunities can be really expensive in time resources. However, the great thing about being in a community is that other people might create great things for you that you can just take advantage of. One of the great things that we've worked with another organization do is that they were also the environment space. And there was an organization, or it was a university. It was a local university who was bringing 3 different types of environmental speakers who by far would have never been able to speak just solely for the organization because of the cost and the expense. But the university brought them in, and what this organization did, is actually create an evening out of it for their donors. They bought a series of tickets, or they worked with the university to get a series of tickets free as long as they promoted it. The second thing is that with some of their major donors, they went out to dinner beforehand, which was great. And then they had a little light hors d'oeuvres. And even in the second, that was in the first one, they went out to dinner and did a light hors d'oeuvres piece. In the second speaker session, what they did is they worked with the university and asked for a little side room where they could ask some of their donors to go over there. And then they had little light appetizers and appreciation stuff for their donors. And this was all from what the university had already planned. And there was no expense in the speaker. It was just for the room and the food and everything. And then what they also did is that in exchange, the organization promoted it to their audience so that the university could get more attendance. So it was a great win-win for both. But the lesson here is look at other activities that are really in your local community and couple against them and think about, and this is a great piece for your board to get involved if you're looking for a great board fundraising thing and they don't like to do anything else or ask for money. I always have charged some board members with going out and looking in the community and see what events relate to our organization, see if they can go out and create a partnership with them for our behalf, and see if we can get some in-kind food and drink and those other things and make a great donor appreciation event for it too. So again, great ways in which that you can partner and do things really on the cheap on the education side too as well. So let's go ahead and then move into our last different discussion, which is around, does it really matter? Does all of this work and all of this pain really matter? And is it painful and is it not? Well, the answer is it does matter. And what we've seen is that the reason why most donors leave is because they didn't feel as if they were connected to the organization after they made the gift. I mean, there's data after data describing that experience. There's also data talking about, I'm not continuing to be involved and it's because I've lost touch. And it's really a reason of the organization. And so what you have to do, though, is you're going to have to quantify some of these things just to make sure that you're getting the end outcome that you want. And for instance, things like, out of all of the donors that participate in some of this programming, how many of them increased gift when we asked them? Now, remember, I just said when we asked them. If you're not asking them for more gifts, you might not get more gifts. So you still got to ask for more gifts. And so, how many of them renewed versus who didn't, who had not experienced the program? The other thing is that you need to give this area a little bit of what we call soft credit, and that is that praise in public about you helping introduce you to other people is credit, and that matters. It may not hit the financial bottom line, but if donors have a great experience with you and they're starting to introduce the organization to other people, and they're starting to do things for you that probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the types of programs that you put together for them, well, then in reality, you don't really have a program there that's really solid for them, and they probably wouldn't have done it anyway. So this is a great way to say we're going to bring our donors so that they can help make experiences for other people too as well, and bring other people to the organization. In that last example I got, that's a great way to say, we're going to have this event. It's going to be at the university. Bring your friends, bring your family members, and we're going to be talking about the environment or do whatever it is. Those are great ways to expand the reach and promote and leverage the organization. It's a great peer endorsement too, really, when it comes to it. So it does matter, but I would say that you do need to quantify what's actually happening. And so things like understanding if those that participate, if they're increasing their gift after you've asked, if we're getting renewals like we should, if we're getting more than one donation than we have in the past, or the total amount of donation in the year has increased because of this. Those are all indicators to look at to see if you have a strong, great stewardship program that's in place. And then I would somehow track sort of that soft credit pieces. And that could be a simple report to the board that says, X amount of them renewed, X amount of them increased their gift, total amounts, all that. And X amount of them actually introduced us to other people. 5 of them actually brought people to a program that we held, or in conjunction with another partner, and so forth. So great pieces that you could definitely use. So as we sort of recap a little bit here before we get to the questions, and feel free to put those questions in right now into the go-to area. First and foremost, that we need to understand 5 categories. Understand the types of donors that you have. You want to go to those donors in the first time when they give to you and understand what their actual preferences are. You want to ask them some questions, make sure that you record what they like and what they don't like, so that you have a chance to go back and ensure that they get what they need. We've talked about different types of communications. Review all the different types of communications. At the very least, send an impact or what's been going on with the organization 6 months within at least 6 months. You can even do it 1 month to 2 months out to show them how their gifts are being made. When it comes to participation, we look at different types of events and different opportunities for them to participate in discussions about your organization. This is where they can promote you. This is all centered around you, and participation at those events might be a key opportunity for them to get involved and bring other people. Understanding that not everybody likes certain special fundraising events and activities versus some of the appreciation events and activities that you might have for the organization. And then I would say we move on to the experiential parts of things, in which that you can use different types of volunteerism, shadowing, different types of tours to help them experience the cause of what's going on, your work, a little bit more intensive than just at an event in which that you just talked briefly. And at those experiences, you are definitely going through and talking through how your impact, the pre and post piece, what made a difference between you and versus somebody else being there. Very, very, very important. We discussed some different ways that you should consider the back of those thank you notes, the different types of the inserts that you can include. If you're sending a thank you note, it's collateral. Let's use it. Let's go beyond just here's the typical tax language that you need to do. There's great opportunity there. Lay it out, provide different options, help them understand the ways they can participate, the ways that they can experience too as well. And when you're also doing this piece too, here's a great way to introduce yourself even more and become, for especially your transactional donors, include images of the people, include images of the staff and the people that you'll be working with and the contact information. Great ways to try and personalize the donation experience, even if they are transactional. The next one is education. We talked a little bit here in this last segment about the different types of education programming. Again, education is focused on the cause. It's not focused on you. And there are opportunities for you to be the content expert. You can put on some of those great sessions, or you can partner with things like universities or anywhere else, other arts organizations, anybody that might have something that will relate to your cause. Create a great way for you to go out and experience that. I like the idea of working in partnership with somebody else who has activities that are going on, speakers, sessions, films, whatever that is that relates to your cause. If no one shows up, it's not a big thing on your piece. But at the very least, though, it's that you can mitigate some of the expenses and work in partnership with whoever's hosting it for you, too. Okay, so that was just a quick rundown just to make sure we're all on the same page. Feel free to go ahead and put some questions into the go-to area here, and we'll make sure and get to those right now. So one of the first questions that comes in is, what would you recommend for an organization that's an $800,000 budget, overall budget? What would you budget for some of these activities? And second question is, what activities would you recommend for our size of organization? Wow. Okay. Whew, loaded question there, which is nice. I don't mind. So the first thing is that when it comes to the size of organization, and remember we said preference, right? Communication. I would really focus on communication, and that piece is done first through your existing communication. Maybe it's an online newsletter, that kind of email newsletter, and so forth. So I think if you can solidify that and maybe create a couple more communication pieces that have no cost to you, but definitely can inform them of what's going on. Sometimes with your size of organization, what I would consider doing is maybe having a small print budget for stewardship, in which that you can send them maybe a postcard or two, which is much cheaper. And on that postcard, you can talk about upcoming events over the course of the next 3 months, ways in which you've used their money. It's a short, brief piece. And so however big your donor base is, you can imagine, you can make that budget. And you could even say, well, maybe only donors above $300 get that versus everybody else is just gets the actual email. So then I would look at from the education stuff that we just talked about and the events. Obviously, some of you may already have a special gala event, and that's your choice whether you do or not. And an appreciation event, one of the great ways to save costs too that we've done is actually gone to a corporate sponsor or somebody or a major donor in their company and said, hey, can you host something for us? Can you host our donor appreciation activity or an event? And it'd be a great way to show individuals what's going on, and a great way to spotlight your corporation and then asking them to underwrite. So there are ways there to save costs too. And then on the education piece, I would definitely partner. So I didn't really answer your question, so I want to do that now, which is, if I was you, 800,000, assuming that you've got a nice individual donor base, I mean, anywhere between 5 and 10,000 is something that I would recommend budgeting in the fundraising department for the things that we discussed, knowing that you want to go in and try and get some of this underwritten by sponsors or supporters overall.